lived a husband and wife.
We longed to have a child.
They longed in vain for quite some time.
At last, however, the wife noticed unmistakable signs.
But God had granted their wish.
Now, in the wall of their house, there was a little window that overlooked a magnificent garden full of every kind of fruit and vegetable.
There was a high wall around that garden.
And no one dared to go into it, for it was the property of a very powerful witch. It was feared by everyone.
One day, the woman was standing at that window, and she saw
A bed of lamb's lettuce,
a Rapunzel. Look,
so fresh and so green.
but she longed to taste some. And this longing grew stronger every day.
Until eventually she became really ill.
Her husband was alarmed at her condition and said,
My dear wife, what is the matter?
Oh, if I can have some of the Rapunzel in the garden in our house, I'll die.
the man loved his wife dearly, so he thought.
Rather than let her die, I have to get some of that Rapunzel. I don't care what it costs.
So as night was falling, he climbed over the high wall and got into the witch's garden, where he pulled up a handful of Rapunzel.
He scrambled back hastily and took it to his wife.
How many chose her at once? I needed hungrily. It tasted good.
In fact, it tasted so good that her desire for it grew stronger and stronger.
And she begged her husband to.
Go and get some more.
So again, as darkness was falling, the husband set off to climb the high wall.
But when he set his foot on the ground and turned to go to the bed of Rapunzel,
There was a witch standing right in front of him.
Sir, you're the wretch who's been stealing my Rapunzel. You'll pay for this. Let me tell you.
That's fair. I can't argue with that. But let me plead for mercy. My wife saw the Rapunzel from that window up there, and she had a craving for it. You know how it is. It was so strong that she thought she might die if she couldn't have some. So I had no choice.
The witch understood the reason.
the anger went out of her expression, and she nodded.
I see. Well, if that's the case, you can have as much Rapunzel as you like. But there is a condition. The child your wife is bearing shall belong to me. It will be perfectly safe. I shall look after it like a mother.
In his fear, the man agreed to this and hurried back to his wife with the Rapunzel.
And when in due course the wife gave birth,
The witch appeared.
And took up the little girl in her arms
I named this child Rapunzel.
and vanished with her.
Rapunzel grew up to become the most beautiful child the sun had ever shone on.
When she was 12 years old, the witch took her into the depths of the forest.
And shut her in a tower with no doors, no stairs, and no windows.
Just one very small room at the top.
When the witch wanted to go in, she would call.
Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair.
Rapunzel had beautiful hair,
Its fine as spun gold.
and of the same lustrous color.
When she heard the witch calling, she untied her hair and fastened it around the window hook before letting down its full length.
All the way to the ground.
20 yards down.
Whereupon the witch climbed up into her little room.
After some years, it happens that the king's son was riding through the forest.
As he came near the tower, he heard a song so lovely that he had to stop and listen to it.
Of course, it was the lonely Rapunzel.
Singing to pass the time.
And she had a sweet voice too.
The prince wanted to go up to her, but there was no door to be found. He was baffled, and he rode home determined to come back again and see if there was another way to get up the tower.
The next day he came back, but with no more success.
Such a beautiful voice, but no singer to be seen.
But whilst he was pondering, he heard someone coming and hid behind a tree.
It was the witch.
When she was at the base of the tower, he heard her call out.
Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair.
To his astonishment, Down from the window tumbled a length of golden hair.
Whereupon the witch climbed up, and clambered in through the window.
Well, if that's the way up, I'll try my luck with it.
So the next day, as darkness was falling, the prince set off to the base of the tower and called out.
Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair.
Down came the hair.
The prince took his fragrant thickness into his hands and climbed up and jumped in through the window.
At first, Rapunzel was terrified.
She had never seen a man before. He was nothing like the witch. He was so strange and unfamiliar to her. But he was so handsome that she didn't know what to say.
However, a prince is never lost for words.
And he begged her not to be frightened. He explained how he'd heard a lovely voice singing from the tower, and how he couldn't rest until he found the singer, and now that he's seen her, he found her face even more beautiful than her voice.
Rapunzel was charmed by this, and soon lost her fear. Instead, she felt delighted at the young prince's company, and agreed to let him visit her again.
4 many days had gone by. Their friendship had developed into love.
And when the prince asked her to marry him,
Rapunzel consented at once.
bye.
But one day, Rapunzel said to her,
You know, it's funny, but my clothes no longer fit me. Every dress I have is too tight.
The witch knew at once what this meant.
You wicked girl! You've deceived me! All this time, you've been entertaining a lover, and now we see the consequences. Well, I shall put an end to that.
The witch took Rapunzel's hair in her right hand and snatched up some scissors with her left, and
Snip, snip.
Don't put the luster strands up with the prince shot climb.
The witch then transported Rapunzel by magic to a wild place far away.
there the poor young woman suffered greatly.
And after a few months, gave birth to twins.
A boy.
And the girl,
They lived like tramps,
they had no money.
No home.
and only what passers-by gave to them.
They were often hungry.
In the winter, they nearly perished of the cold.
And in summer, they were scorched by the burning sun.
But back to the tower.
On the evening of the day that Rapunzel's hair was cut off, the prince went to the tower as usual and called out.
Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair.
The witch was lying in wait. She had tied Rapunzel's hair to a window hook, and when she heard him call, she threw it down as the girl had done.
The prince climbed up.
But instead of his beloved Rapunzel, he found an old, ugly woman demented with anger, whose eyes flashed with fury as he ran at him.
So, you're a fancy boy, are you? You worm your way into the tower. You worm your way into her affections. You worm your way into her bed, you rogue, you leech, you lung-littered, you high-born mongrel. Well, the bird's not in a nest anymore. The cat's got her. And the cat will scratch your pretty eyes out too before she's finished. Rapunzel's gone. You hear me? You'll never see her again.
The witch forced the prince backwards and backwards until he fell out the window.
A bruise broke his heart.
Of freezing his eyes.
Blinded in body and broken in spirit, the prince wandered away.
No. He lived as a baker for some time, not knowing which country he was in.
But one day,
He heard a familiar voice
a voice that he loved.
and stumbled towards it.
And as he did, so he heard more voices joining in.
The voices of children.
And suddenly the singing stopped.
He because her mother Rapunzel had recognized the prince.
And was running towards him.
They embraced.
Both of them crying with joy,
And then 2 of Rapunzel's tears fell into the prince's eyes.
and his vision became clear once more.
And I saw his dear Rapunzel.
And he saw his 2 children for the first time.
Oh, children. So, reunited, they traveled back to the prince's kingdom.
Where they were welcomed.
And there they lived.
For the rest of their long and happy lives.